Solzhenitsyn describes the reactions and actions of staunch Communist Party members imprisoned and devoured by the system they supported and produced. Frequently, the camp system vacuumed people up really without any concern whatsoever for the niceties of individual guilt or innocence. As far as Stalin and his henchmen were concerned, there was probably something that you were guilty about at some point in your past, and there were no shortage of people to inform on you regardless of whether you had done anything. So one of the things that used to happen in the collective apartment buildings, of which there were nowhere near enough of, so multiple families would end up living in the same tiny apartment, was that if you could inform on someone down the hall who, you know, maybe refused to return the quarter cup of salt you had lent them or something like that, if you would inform on them and their family would be carted away to the concentration camp system, then you got to have their apartment. And so in East Germany, at the height of the Soviet system, 1 out of every 3 people was a government informer. And so that meant if you had a family of 6 people, there were 2 people in every room that you were ever in who were ready to say to the authorities anything you ever had the temerity to speak, and perhaps to tell them all sorts of things that you didn't even do, because there was a requirement, if you were an informer, to ensure that you had something to say every time you came in to inform. Well, it didn't matter if you were a devout communist, because from time to time your door would be kicked down at 3 a.m. in the morning and people would come in with jackboots and get you dressed as rapidly as they possibly could and take you away when you were still half awake to the prison in the middle of the city and strip you of your clothes and give you things that didn't fit and shave your head and take you off to a camp, and you'd never get to see your family again. And that happened to millions of people. And it happened to staunch communists just like it happened to people who in principle were opposed to the system. And Solzhenitsyn thought that the staunch Communist Party members who were thrown into the camps had the worst time of it of everyone, because the people who'd already decided that the system was corrupt weren't really surprised when it happened, even though it was still terrible. But the Communist Party members had given their whole life to the system, and then they were picked up just like everyone else. And he had a very hard time with them when they came to prison, because most of them assumed that a terrible mistake had been made, and that if they just wrote the right people and contacted their former friends, who would now, by the way, have nothing to do with them, that the error would be rectified and they soon would be released. So they also assumed that everyone else in the camps was completely guilty and was there for good reason, because otherwise the beloved party wouldn't have put them there. But for some reason they had been imprisoned because they were innocent, despite the fact that they were innocent. And Solzhenitsyn and his friends used to play a game with people like that, because he didn't exactly know how to treat them, because on the one hand they were victims, certainly, but on the other hand they were part of the system that had perpetrated precisely the horrors that were visited on them. And so when they first came in and were still chock full of communist dogma and totalitarian thought and judgmental in every possible way, him and his friends would have fun pointing out all the shortages and catastrophes of the Soviet system, and then let them run through their algorithmic ideology and to the point of absurdity, and then really not spend much time communicating with them until they broke down and decided that things weren't so good for them or everybody else, and more or less entered the common run of humanity once again. To say that things were hard for them is to say almost nothing. They were incapable of assimilating such a blow, such a downfall, and from their own people too, from their own dear party, and from all appearances for nothing at all. After all, they'd been guilty of nothing as far as the party was concerned. Nothing at all. It was painful for them to such a degree that it was considered taboo among them, uncomradely, to ask, "What were you imprisoned for?" The only squeamish generation of prisoners. The rest of us with tongues hanging out couldn't wait to tell the story to every chance newcomer we met, and to the whole cell, as if it were an anecdote. Here's the sort of people they were. Olga Sliosberg's husband had already been arrested, and they had come to carry out a search and arrest her too. The search lasted 4 hours, and she spent those remaining 4 hours sorting out the minutes of the Congress of Stakhanovites of the bristle and brush industry, of which she had been secretary until the previous day. The incomplete state of the minutes troubled her more than her children, who she was now leaving forever. Even the interrogator conducting the search could not resist telling her, "Come on now, say farewell to your children." Here's the sort of people they were. A letter from her 15-year-old daughter came to Yelizaveta Tsetkova in the Kazan prison for long-term prisoners. Mama, tell me, write to me, are you guilty or not? I hope you weren't guilty, because then I won't join the Komsomol. So that was the Soviet youth organization. I won't join the Komsomol, and I won't forgive them because of you. But if you are guilty, I won't write you anymore, and I will hate you. And the mother was stricken by remorse in her damp, grave-like cell with its dim little lamp. How could her daughter live without the Komsomol? How could she be permitted to hate Soviet power? Better that she should hate me. And she wrote, I am guilty. Enter the Komsomol. How could it be anything but hard? It was more than the human heart could bear to fall beneath the beloved axe and then have to justify its wisdom. But that is the price a man pays for entrusting his God-given soul to human dogma. Even today, any Orthodox communist will affirm that Tsetkova acted correctly. Even today, they cannot be convinced that this is precisely the perversion of small forces, that the mother perverted her daughter and harmed her soul. Here's the sort of people they were. YT gave sincere testimony against her husband, anything to aid the party. Oh, how one could pity them, if at least now they had come to comprehend their former wretchedness. This whole chapter could have been written quite differently if today they had at least forsaken their earlier views. But it happened the way Maria Danielin had dreamed it would. If I leave here someday, I'm going to live as if nothing had taken place. Loyalty. In our view, it is just plain pig-headedness. These devotees to the theory of development construed loyalty to that development to mean renunciation of any personal development whatsoever. As Nikolai Adamovich Vilenchuk said after serving 17 years, we believed in the party and we were not mistaken. Is this loyalty or pig-headedness? It was not for show and not out of hypocrisy that they argued in the cells in defense of all the government's actions. They needed ideological arguments in order to hold onto a sense of their own rightness. Otherwise, insanity was not far off. I'm going to tell you a story.